So what is Windy Grid, besides sort of the favorite pet project of this department that has grown into the best example of what we're using analytics to drive operational improvement today? So we're going through enterprise rollout now, so let me tell you what it is. What is Windy Grid? So Windy Grid is a program that makes the city's vast amounts of data, which I'm sure is something similar to what you guys have, because cities are fairly similar at that level. It takes our vast amounts of data and makes them easily accessible to help our departments make immediate and long-term operational decisions. We built a very fast and functional prototype to meet the needs of NATO, and then we've spent the last 8 months or so improving and proofing that prototype to make it enterprise-proof and to roll it out to all of our departments. So what does it do? Our departments use it in 3 ways, and we can talk about some specific examples to really help you understand how it pulls the data together. So what you're looking at now is a map of Windy Grid. That's actually a map of the neighborhood where I happen to live. It makes it easier to pull up that way. So Windy Grid supports real-time situational awareness. So the application presents a unified view of operations across a map of Chicago. So this gives our personnel access to vast amounts of information in an easily accessible visual format. So rather than giving our policemen or our streets and sanitation workers or our transportation workers a list of where things are, we show them where they are, which makes them much easier to find. This includes things like, in the picture you're looking at now, these data points, includes things like 911 and 311 service calls, asset locations, where are all the fire hydrants, for example, building information. It pulls in tweets, what are people seeing, what are people tweeting about, and other critical data. So this does, with proper clearance of the user, does include public safety information. It's invaluable when we're deploying crews to manage crowd control, for example, or clean up after large civic events such as parades. So if you flash back for a minute to the NATO example, this was invaluable when we were managing the crowds related to the protesters or the crowds related to the delegates as they moved through the city. Basically, it actually could show whichever department was engaged or all departments that were engaged where things were at a moment in time. So that's situational awareness. The second way that it's used is for instantaneous deep dive analysis. So Windy Grid can provide up to the second data presentation for a specific location. So whereas the picture that you're looking at now is an overall situational analysis, Windy Grid can also give a deep dive of a single point on a map. So this gives our city personnel the ability to plan at a greater level of detail a specific response at a specific address and its immediate surrounding areas. So think, for example, in the event of a fire, the responding fire department squad can know instantaneously about any nearby 911 calls, where other emergency vehicles might be located, or other public and private assets that may affect their response plan. They also can pull in both current and historic data, which makes the response plan more robust and has resulted in some relatively new pilots around this. So the data is very fresh here, so I'm sort of letting you know where we're going on some of this. But we've been able to actually provide data to our fire response teams that has allowed them to adjust their response plans and protect the safety of their workers to a greater extent than if they didn't have the data. And then the third way that we use this information has less to do with the visual layer that you're looking here, which has more to, which is useful in terms of real-time response. The third way that we use Windy Grid has more to do with the back-end data that drives this visual layer, but less to do with the visual layer. And that is to support tactical and strategic predictive modeling. So because of all of the data that drives Windy Grid, it provides a comprehensive analytics platform that helps us understand the impact of changes in service delivery. So we're helping departments use this to analyze historic patterns or to model future changes in delivery so that we can determine what might result in improved outcomes or cost savings. So a good example of one of the things that we're looking at is we have a very large and aging water and sewer infrastructure here in Chicago. And the water department is in the midst of rolling out a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure replacement program. And one of the things that they are finding is when they replace a very old sewer main, they're seeing an increase in rodent issues in that neighborhood between 2 and 3 weeks after the sewer replacement. They sort of were getting this sense from an anecdotal standpoint, the challenge being that the department responsible for rodent response is a different department than the water department, which was responsible for the sewer replacement. We can preempt that increase in rodent issues by pre-baiting the neighborhood where the sewer main is going to be replaced. However, that's actually quite an expensive response to a problem that may or may not be occurring. We have the historical data from both the water department and the streets and sanitation department to actually put together the occurrences of sewer main replacements with rodent baiting challenges to see if actually there is a correlation. And we're actually building that model right now for the water and streets and sanitation departments to see if they need to coordinate their service delivery and alter their service delivery to prevent the increase in rodent problems when we're addressing the replacement of sewer mains. Nobody loves talking about rodent problems, but when you're a city that is on a large lake, it's actually something we take very seriously, and we can actually spend less on rodent baiting if we do it proactively than wait for the problem to occur. So one of the things that's actually sort of most interesting about WindyGrid, and I'll move on in a minute, besides the fact that it actually has an application to every one of our departments and is driving cost savings and qualitative service delivery improvements immediately, is how cheaply we were able to build it and how quickly. We actually started building the prototype for NATO. So NATO was at the end of May. We began building the prototype in February, and we actually built it either using applications we had in-house. So the front end that you're seeing here was built on our Esri GIS applications, which we already had in-house. The back end is actually built on open source software. We use the MongoDB cluster to manage the database on the back end. So this was built incredibly cost effectively and from either open source software or using mapping software that we already had in-house within our GIS department. So rather than having to go out and acquire what would have been probably, frankly, a multi-million-dollar data management system, we were able to build this for arguably, it's a little bit hard to estimate because we used something we already owned in-house for other purposes, but really this probably cost us maybe $100,000 at the time to lead up to NATO and the work of in-house staff. As we deploy it, it's still relatively inexpensive because the MongoDB cluster, we pay limited services of less than $40,000 a year, and we maintain obviously our Esri licenses for our GIS system, and it ties into that. But this is primarily an open source system, so you were able to build it quickly and at very little expense, and this has been able to leverage our open data to the value of our operational departments. Which brings us up to where we go next, and pretty proud of this one, but we found out earlier this year that we were one of the $1 million winners of the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, and we'll be using that money to progress past what WindyGrid lets us do, which is cut across our siloed data to make strong operational decisions, to actually building an open source predictive analytics platform, which takes us from managing kind of a medium data issue, a couple, say, I don't know, a couple million rows of data, which is what Windy Grid helps us manage, to really tackling the big data problem of analytics, which has really not been answered by anyone. We'll be using the money that we won in the Mayor's Challenge to build a predictive analytics platform that answers the big data challenge, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit more detail in just a second. And so the next horizon for us, and what we started doing towards the end of 2012, was figuring out how to take this foundation around open data and really optimizing our use of that data. And that meant getting open data out of the mayor's office and out into the departments and embedded in our operations. So our data portal and Windy Grid were piloted and built in the mayor's office by the chief data officer. And that was great, and it's a really strong foundation, but it's not scalable. So back in June, we made one more significant move in how we were doing things, and that was at the mayor's request. And I take request lightly because the request was made of me and the chief data officer. And Mayor Emanuel, when he makes a request, it sounds very vaguely like an order. But it was a request that I was very happy to take on. It's quite the challenge. Was he actually asked Brett, the chief data officer, and me at the time, I was a deputy over in the budget department, to come over to the Department of Innovation and Technology and take our backgrounds in data and my background, which was in management consulting and business optimization, and bring those together and remake the city's approach to information technology and innovation to drive out his vision of technology driving the city's operations, and really embed in everything that the city did our reliance and use of data to drive decision making. So Brett and I said yes, and we moved over to the Department of Innovation and Technology in June, and we've spent the last year remaking our department. And that has required some really, somewhat less sexy investments in infrastructure and et cetera that I'll talk about really quickly in a minute. But we're really critical to moving from sort of startup phase around data and transparency to getting to operationalization of really using our data and making sure that our data portal became more than just a portal, and that using data became a way of life here in Chicago. And that's the test for us in the next 2 years, and that's what I want to spend the last 5 minutes talking about. I know I've been going a little bit fast, so hopefully there'll be questions for us to continue the discussion.